Section 1. You're in the middle of your workday when a Slack notification pops up. Hey, quick question, can you jump on something real fast? You look at your calendar and see a gap. You're technically free. But your stomach drops anyway. Here's the truth most people miss. You can have an open schedule and still be emotionally overdrawn. And if you keep treating availability like an obligation, you'll stay drained no matter how much time you save. This is the kind of fatigue that doesn't show up on a planner. It shows up as low patience, mental fog, and that subtle dread when your phone buzzes. At work, you finish tasks but never feel finished because you keep absorbing other people's urgency. In relationships, you keep the peace, respond quickly, stay nice, and then wonder why you feel numb or irritable afterward. Even on weekends, you might have free hours, yet you can't fully relax because your mind is still bracing for the next request. And the stakes are real. If nothing changes, you lose focus, you lose sleep, and you quietly lose self-respect because you start living like your energy belongs to everyone else before it belongs to you. By the end of this lesson, you'll be able to tell the difference between having time and having capacity. You'll learn how to set limits based on emotional energy, not just hours. And you'll walk away with a few simple sentences you can use immediately, at work, with family, or with someone you care about, so you can protect your bandwidth without starting fights or disappearing. Educational content inspired by classical Stoic texts. Not medical, psychological, financial, or legal advice. If you want steady Stoic focus lessons on emotional control, boundaries, and relationships every week, this is the channel for you. Stay with me until the very end, and while you're here, hit like, tap subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Now let's make this practical, because boundaries are not a personality trait. They're a skill. And the reason this feels hard is that you've been trained, by work culture, social expectations, and sometimes family dynamics, to treat access to you as normal. You answer fast because it's easier than dealing with someone's disappointment. You say yes because you don't want the awkwardness that comes after no. You keep explaining yourself because you're trying to be understood, but what you're really doing is negotiating your own limit. The core mistake is thinking boundaries are mostly about time. Time is easy to measure. Energy is not. Energy is affected by context. A 10-minute conversation with someone who pressures you can cost more than 2 hours of focused work. A quick favor that comes with guilt can ruin your whole afternoon. A casual text thread can drain you if you feel like you have to manage someone else's emotions. When you don't account for that, you start making decisions that look logical on paper and feel terrible in your body. Here's what's going on underneath. Your nervous system learns patterns. If every ping means you must respond, your body starts treating notifications like alarms. If every request becomes a negotiation, your brain starts anticipating conflict even before you speak. That's why you can be free and still feel trapped. You're not trapped by time. You're trapped by the expectation that your attention is always on call. The Stoics were blunt about this. Epictetus reminds us that we don't control what others ask of us, but we do control what we grant access to, our time, our focus, and our peace. That doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop surrendering your inner stability just to avoid discomfort. In modern life, most exhaustion comes from tiny surrenders that happen so quickly you don't even name them. You feel the pressure, you comply, you move on. And by Thursday, you're empty. So your goal isn't to become rigid. Your goal is to become accurate. Accurate about what you can genuinely give without resentment. Accurate about what you can postpone without guilt. Accurate about what you can decline without needing to write a paragraph explaining your childhood and your workload and your intentions. People who respect you don't require a courtroom defense. They require clarity. And if you're thinking, but I'm a good person, I should be helpful, hold that thought. Being helpful is good. Being constantly available is not the same thing as being good. Constant availability often turns into quiet bitterness, and bitterness shows up later as coldness, snapping, avoidance, or withdrawal. A boundary today is what prevents a blow-up tomorrow. We're also going to keep this grounded in real life. This isn't about dramatic ultimatums. It's about small decisions: when you reply, how you reply, what you tolerate, what you don't, and how you choose to spend your best mental hours. Because if you spend your best bandwidth on everyone else's urgency, you'll have nothing left for your own priorities, your health, your relationships, your goals, your rest, your sense of self. First, we're going to break the belief that open time automatically means you owe access to others. Next, you'll learn to spot the early signals that a request is draining you before you agree out of habit. Then, you'll practice a few calm, clean sentences that protect your energy without over-explaining. After that, you'll learn how to hold steady when someone pushes back, pressures you, or tries to make you feel guilty. Finally, you'll tie it all together so you move through your week with more capacity left, not because you did less, but because you stopped leaking energy in invisible places. And in a bit, we'll walk through a Friday night moment where you get a message that would normally pull you into a long, draining back and forth, and you'll see exactly how one calm boundary keeps your entire weekend intact. Section 2. You're going to stop treating open time like it automatically means you're available. That's the shift. Because the fastest way to stay drained, even with a free schedule, is to keep saying yes just because there's space on the calendar. The problem is that if you don't learn this distinction, you'll keep donating your best mental bandwidth to other people's urgency, and by the time you get to your own priorities, you'll be running on fumes and resentment. Here's why this matters so much. Time is a measurement, but energy is a resource. Time is neutral. Energy is emotional, physical, and cognitive. You can have an hour free and still be at zero capacity because your mind is already carrying too much. You can have a packed day and still feel steady because your energy is protected and your tasks are aligned. When you confuse time with capacity, you end up agreeing to things you can technically fit but can't emotionally carry. That's when you start feeling trapped by your own openness. You look at the day and think, I should be fine, and then you're inexplicably irritated, foggy, or numb. This is how a calmer, more focused version of you responds instead of reacting. You don't ask, can I squeeze this in? You ask, can I do this without paying for it later? It works because your nervous system learns patterns from what you repeatedly tolerate. If every notification means you must respond, your body starts treating pings like alarms. If every request turns into immediate compliance, your brain stops believing you have a choice. And when your brain doesn't feel choice, it creates pressure. Pressure creates tension. Tension creates exhaustion. That's why even on an easy day you can feel depleted. It's not the workload, it's the constant micro-surrender of your attention. You're not just doing tasks. You're carrying other people's expectations, speed, and emotional temperature. Capacity is the part of you that decides how much of that you can handle without losing yourself. So you're going to build a boundary at the level most people ignore. Before you decide what you can do, you check what it will cost. Not in minutes. In nervous system strain. In mental clutter. In the aftertaste you'll carry into the rest of your day. This isn't selfish. It's accurate. And accuracy is what prevents resentment. A lot of resentment isn't caused by what other people demand. It's caused by what you agree to while pretending it's fine. Here's the microscript you'll use, word for word, because you don't need a speech. You need one clean line that tells the truth without drama. I have time for this, but I don't have the energy to do it well right now. I can do it tomorrow. If you need it even shorter, make it, I can't do this well today. I can do it tomorrow. The point is that you're not rejecting the person. You're protecting the quality of your attention. And you're refusing to pretend that availability equals capacity. Now imagine a real scene. It's Tuesday afternoon, you're in the US or Canada, you've been on Zoom calls since morning, and your brain feels like it's been rubbed raw. Your calendar shows a gap before your last meeting, and you're hoping to use it to reset. Then a coworker sends a Slack message, hey, can you review this deck real quick before I send it? The old reaction is almost automatic. You see the open time, you think, sure, I can, and you jump in, even though your eyes already feel tired. You skim too fast, miss a key detail, and then you spend the next hour fixing what you should have caught the first time. You feel annoyed at them, but mostly you feel annoyed at yourself because you knew you didn't have the capacity. The new response starts with a pause. You notice the heaviness in your chest and the way your mind wants to sprint. You type the line, "I have time for this, but I don't have the energy to do it well right now. I can give it a solid look tomorrow morning." They might not love it, but they get clarity. And you keep your nervous system from sliding into that drained, brittle state that follows you into the evening. This is also how it plays out outside work. A friend texts, "Can I call for a minute? I just need to vent." You care about them, but you're already carrying your own load. The old version of you says yes immediately, then you spend an hour absorbing their stress, and afterward you can't focus on anything. Then you feel guilty for feeling resentful, which drains you even more. The steadier version of you checks capacity first. You respond kindly and clearly, "I care about you. I can't make a call tonight, but I can talk tomorrow." That isn't rejection. That is responsible energy management. You're not cutting people off. You're choosing the time when you can actually show up without collapsing. The tiny action today is straightforward and measurable. For the next 24 hours, don't answer requests on the first impulse. When a request comes in, give yourself a 10-second buffer and ask one question: do I have capacity to do this without paying for it later? If the answer is no, use the microscript and offer a specific alternative time. You're not disappearing. You're pacing. Now let's practice it slowly so your body learns it, not just your mind. Right now, take 3 calm breaths with me, in, hold, and out. Again, in, hold, and out. One more time, in, hold, and out. As you breathe, picture a request you tend to say yes to automatically. See the message on your screen. Feel the familiar pressure to respond fast. And then, without rushing, say the microscript out loud once: "I have time for this, but I don't have the energy to do it well right now. I can do it tomorrow." Say it again, a little slower, like you mean it. Notice what comes up. Maybe guilt. Maybe fear. Maybe the urge to explain. Let that urge be there without obeying it. You're training yourself to tolerate the discomfort of not being instantly available, because that discomfort is cheaper than the resentment you pay later. One more thing that matters: you don't need to convince anyone that your capacity is real. You only need to honor it. People who respect you will adjust. People who benefit from you being endlessly available might push. That doesn't mean you're wrong. It means the old pattern served them. Your job is not to preserve the old pattern. Your job is to protect your energy so you can live your life with steadiness and self-respect. Hold on to this distinction, because it's the foundation for everything that follows. If you can separate time from capacity, you stop making agreements you'll regret. And when we get to that Friday night moment later, this is the exact shift that keeps you from giving away your weekend before it even starts. Section 3. Most people don't lose their energy all at once. They lose it the moment before they speak. Section 3 is about slowing that moment down, because if you answer every request at the speed it arrives, you're letting urgency make decisions for you. The stake is clear: when you respond immediately to emotionally loaded requests, you train everyone, including yourself, to believe that access to you is instant and unlimited, and that belief will drain you faster than any full calendar ever could. Here's the core shift: speed is not the same thing as care. You've probably been taught, directly or indirectly, that fast responses equal reliability, kindness, or professionalism. But what actually happens is that speed bypasses judgment. When you answer immediately, you don't check capacity, intention, or consequences. You react. And reacting feels efficient in the moment, but it costs you later in frustration, second-guessing, and emotional hangovers. A steadier version of you doesn't rush to prove availability. That version creates a small pause so responses come from choice, not pressure. This works because urgency is contagious. When someone feels anxious, stressed, or impatient, that emotional state tries to move into your body. If you respond instantly, your nervous system syncs with theirs. You take on their pace, their tension, their need for resolution. But when you pause, even briefly, you interrupt that transfer. You remind your system that you are not in danger and that you get to decide how and when to engage. This is how emotional boundaries actually function in daily life. Not through confrontation, but through timing. The exact sentence you'll practice here is simple and intentionally boring. I've seen this. I'll get back to you after I think it through. That's it. No apology. No explanation. No promise of immediacy. You're acknowledging receipt without surrendering your attention. If you need a version that feels warmer, you can say, I want to give this proper thought. I'll follow up later. Both lines do the same thing. They buy you space. Picture a familiar North American scenario. It's early evening. You've just wrapped up work, your mind is already shifting toward rest, and a text comes in from a family member or friend. Can you help me decide something real quick? The old reaction kicks in before you even notice it. You reply instantly, ask questions, get pulled into a back and forth, and suddenly 40 minutes are gone. You feel oddly irritated afterward, not because the person did anything wrong, but because you never chose to engage, you were swept in. The new response looks different. You read the message, feel the little spike of urgency, and you don't answer yet. You let 10 minutes pass. Then you send the line, I've seen this. I'll get back to you after I think it through. Nothing bad happens. The world doesn't collapse. And you stay in control of your evening. This matters even more at work. Imagine you're in the US or Canada, mid-morning, deep into a task that requires focus. An email arrives marked urgent. The subject line alone tightens your chest. The old version of you opens it immediately, context switches, and starts responding, even though it derails your momentum. The steadier version notices the reaction and pauses. You scan the message, assess whether it truly requires immediate action, and send a short acknowledgement, got this. I'll review and respond shortly. That pause protects your focus and prevents you from living in constant reactive mode. The tiny action for today is very specific. For the next 24 hours, do not give full responses to emotionally loaded messages right away. Instead, send a receipt message or say nothing at all for at least 10 minutes. You're not ghosting. You're creating a response window. Track how often the urgency dissolves on its own once you don't feed it. Now let's slow this into your body so it sticks. Right now, bring to mind the last message that made you feel pressured to respond immediately. Notice where you feel it, maybe in your throat, your chest, or your jaw. Take one slow breath in, hold it, and let it out. As you exhale, silently repeat, I don't have to decide this right now. Say it again, a little slower. You're teaching your nervous system that delay is safe. What usually comes up next is discomfort. You might feel guilty. You might imagine the other person being annoyed. You might want to explain yourself preemptively. This is the hardest part for people who are used to being accommodating. But remember, discomfort now is cheaper than resentment later. When you tolerate a few minutes of unease, you prevent hours of internal friction afterward. There's also an identity shift happening here. When you respond slowly and intentionally, you stop being the person who's always on call and start being the person whose responses carry weight. People learn that when you answer, it's considered. That doesn't make you distant. It makes you trustworthy. You're no longer scattering your attention, you're placing it. This idea pairs directly with what you learned earlier about capacity. Even if you technically have the energy, immediate responses still cost you focus. They fragment your attention and keep your nervous system in a state of readiness. By delaying, you create psychological closure around the interruption. You finish what you were doing. You choose when to re-engage. That choice is the boundary. As a final slow practice, say the microscript out loud once, I've seen this. I'll get back to you after I think it through. Say it again, slower, and notice how your body reacts. If there's tension, don't try to eliminate it. Let it be there while you hold the line. That's the muscle you're building. Keep this pause in mind as we move forward. In the next section, we'll look at what happens when people don't accept your delay and start pushing for immediate answers, and how to stay steady without escalating or caving. Section 4. People don't usually drain you by asking once. They drain you by pushing after you pause. Section 4 is about what happens when you create space and someone tries to close it for you. The stake is this: if you don't learn how to hold a boundary when pressure shows up, you'll keep caving, over-explaining, or snapping, and every one of those responses costs you more energy than the original request ever did. Here's the shift you're making now. A boundary isn't just what you say. It's what you can calmly repeat when the other person doesn't like your answer. Most people fail at boundaries not because they're unclear, but because they collapse at the first sign of resistance. The moment someone questions, sighs, or pushes back, you feel tension rise and your instinct is to relieve it by giving in, justifying yourself, or getting sharp. None of those protect your energy. A steadier version of you understands that pushback is normal. It's not a signal that you're wrong. It's just feedback that the old pattern is changing. This works because pressure feeds on reaction. When someone senses hesitation, guilt, or defensiveness, they often lean in harder, not necessarily out of malice, but out of habit. If you respond with long explanations, you turn your boundary into a debate. If you get irritated, you escalate the situation and create emotional fallout. But when you stay calm and consistent, the pressure has nowhere to land. Your nervous system stays regulated, and theirs eventually has to adjust. The exact line you'll use here is deliberately plain: "That doesn't work for me." If you need a slightly warmer version, it's, "I'm not able to do that." Notice what's missing. No reasons. No apologies. No extra context. You're not being cold, you're being clear. The boundary lives in the repetition, not the wording. Picture a common North American scenario. It's Thursday afternoon, you've already decided to protect your evening, and a coworker circles back after you delayed earlier. They message again, "Just checking, can you still help with this tonight?" The old reaction kicks in. You feel that squeeze in your chest. You start typing an explanation about how busy you've been, how you wish you could, how maybe you can look at it later. Before you know it, you're negotiating against yourself. The new response is quieter. You read the message, take one breath, and reply, "That doesn't work for me." If they push again, it'll only take a few minutes. You don't escalate. You repeat, calmly, "I'm not able to do that tonight." That's it. You're not rude. You're not defensive. You're steady. This matters even more in personal relationships. Imagine a partner, friend, or family member who's used to having access to you whenever they want. You've delayed a call because you needed rest, and they respond with disappointment or subtle guilt, "I guess you're too busy for me." The old version of you rushes to fix the feeling. You apologize, over-explain, or give in just to smooth things over. The steadier version notices the emotional pull and resists it. You respond with care and firmness, "I hear that you're upset. I'm still not able to talk tonight." You're acknowledging emotion without surrendering your boundary. That distinction protects your energy and preserves the relationship long-term, even if it feels uncomfortable in the moment. The reason this is so hard is that many people confuse boundaries with rejection. When someone pushes, it can trigger an old fear of being seen as selfish, unreliable, or unkind. But here's the reality: a boundary isn't a verdict on the relationship. It's a statement about capacity at this moment. When you explain less, you actually give people less material to argue with. Clarity shortens conflict. Explanations invite negotiation. The tiny action for today is very specific. Choose one boundary you've already set but tend to soften under pressure. Decide in advance what your repeat line will be: either "That doesn't work for me" or "I'm not able to do that." Write it down if you need to. When the push comes, use the line once. If it comes again, use it again, unchanged. You're not escalating. You're anchoring. Now let's slow this down into your body, because this is where most people feel it. Think of the last time someone pushed after you said no or delayed. Notice where you feel it, maybe a tight throat, a sinking stomach, or heat in your chest. Take a slow breath in, hold it, and let it out. As you exhale, silently repeat, I don't need to be convinced. Say it again, slower. Let the discomfort be there without fixing it. That's the practice. What you're training is tolerance for tension. Not tension forever, just long enough for the moment to pass. Most pushback fades when it's not rewarded. People adjust when they realize the boundary isn't moving. And even if they don't adjust immediately, you've still protected your energy and your self-respect. There's also an identity shift happening here. When you hold boundaries under pressure, you stop seeing yourself as someone who manages other people's reactions. You become someone who manages your own state. That's a powerful change. You're no longer living in anticipation of disappointment or conflict. You're responding to what's actually happening, one calm sentence at a time. This section builds directly on what came before. You learn to check capacity. You learn to slow responses. Now you're learning to stay steady when those choices are tested. This is where boundaries become real. Not when you say them once, but when you hold them without drama. Keep this in mind as we move forward. In the next section, we'll talk about how to add warmth back into your interactions so boundaries don't feel like withdrawal or distance, but like something that actually makes connection safer and more sustainable. Section 5. One of the biggest fears people have once they start setting boundaries is this: if I don't give more, explain more, reassure more, I'll seem cold. So they swing in the opposite direction. They soften the boundary until it disappears. They keep talking. They keep checking in. They keep filling the silence. And the problem is this: when you add emotional labor on top of a boundary, you drain yourself almost as much as if you never set the boundary at all. Here's the shift in this section: warmth does not require overextension. You can be kind without being porous. You can be caring without managing other people's comfort. A grounded version of you knows that emotional presence is not the same thing as emotional overgiving. When you confuse the two, you end up exhausted and oddly disconnected, even from people you genuinely care about. This works because most emotional drain doesn't come from saying no. It comes from what you do after saying no. The extra explanations. The repeated reassurance. They check to see if they're okay. The mental replay where you wonder if you were too harsh. All of that keeps your nervous system activated long after the interaction is over. You might look calm on the outside, but internally you're still attuned to someone else's emotional state. Warmth, real warmth, doesn't do that. It lands, and then it lets go. The steadier approach is to separate tone from content. Content is the boundary. Tone is humanity. You don't need to sacrifice one for the other. When your tone is calm and respectful, the boundary can stay short. When your tone is warm, you don't need to add extra words. This is how emotionally mature adults communicate. They let kindness live in how they speak, not in how much they give. Here's the microscript you'll practice in this section: I care about you, and I'm still not able to do that. That's it. One sentence. Warmth and limit in the same breath. You're not apologizing. You're not promising future availability you can't guarantee. You're naming care without opening the door. Picture a familiar scenario. A friend texts you asking to talk, and you know they're going through something. You genuinely care. But you're already depleted, and you've decided not to take calls tonight. The old pattern kicks in. You say no, but then you follow it with paragraphs. You explain how much you care. You apologize multiple times. You offer to text while also saying you can't talk. By the end, you've spent 20 minutes managing the interaction, and you feel strangely resentful even though you wanted to be kind. The new response is simpler. You pause, check capacity, and send, I care about you, and I'm not able to talk tonight. I can check in tomorrow. You put the phone down. You don't hover. You don't reopen the thread unless they respond. And your nervous system gets to settle. This also shows up at work in subtle ways. Imagine you decline a meeting or delay a task. The old version of you softens the message so much that it sounds uncertain. You add smiley faces. You overthink you. You imply guilt. That invites follow-up, clarification, and pressure. The steadier version keeps the message warm but contained. I appreciate you thinking of me. I'm not able to take this on right now. Polite. Clear. Finished. The reason this feels uncomfortable is that many people learned early that warmth meant availability. If you were kind, you were expected to give. If you pulled back, you were seen as uncaring. That association runs deep, and when you break it, your body reacts before your mind catches up. You might feel a pull to check in again. You might feel selfish. You might feel like you need to prove you're still a good person. None of that means you did anything wrong. It means you're learning a new pattern. The tiny action today is very specific. The next time you set a boundary, add exactly one warm sentence, and then stop. No follow-up messages. No emotional buffering. One sentence of care, one sentence of limit, and you're done. Notice how much energy that saves compared to your usual approach. Now let's slow this into your body, because this is where the habit lives. Think of someone you tend to overgive to emotionally. Picture them asking for more than you can give. Feel the familiar urge to explain or soften. Take a slow breath in, hold it, and let it out. As you exhale, say quietly, care doesn't require collapse. Say it again, slower. Let your shoulders drop as you say it. You're teaching your body that warmth and firmness can coexist. Another thing to watch for here is the silence after a boundary. Silence can feel threatening if you're used to constant reassurance. You might interpret it as anger, disappointment, or withdrawal. But most of the time, it's just processing. When you rush to fill that silence, you rob both yourself and the other person of the chance to adjust. Holding silence is a boundary skill. It gives your nervous system time to settle and signals that the interaction is complete. There's also an important relational payoff to this approach. When you stop overfunctioning emotionally, relationships become clearer. People learn what they can expect from you, and you learn who respects your limits without needing constant explanation. That clarity reduces long-term tension. Instead of closeness built on exhaustion, you get connection built on choice. This doesn't mean you never go the extra mile. It means when you do, it's intentional. It's chosen. It comes from abundance, not obligation. And that difference is felt by both sides. When you give from capacity instead of pressure, generosity feels clean instead of draining. This section builds directly on the last one. You learned how to hold a boundary under pressure. Now you're learning how to keep your humanity intact while you do it. Warmth without overextension is what makes boundaries sustainable. Without it, you either burn out or shut down. With it, you stay open without leaking energy. As we move forward, keep this distinction close. You don't owe emotional labor just because you care. In the next section, we'll look at what happens when guilt shows up anyway, and how to recognize it as a signal, not a command, so it stops running your decisions. Section 6. Guilt is the feeling that shows up right after you do the right thing for your energy. It's the quiet tax that appears when you stop overgiving. Section 6 is about learning to recognize guilt as a signal, not an instruction, because if you obey it automatically, it will undo every boundary you've set so far. The stake is simple. If guilt gets to make decisions for you, your boundaries will exist only in theory, not in real life. Here's the shift you're making now. Guilt is not proof that you did something wrong. Most of the time, it's proof that you broke an old pattern. When you've been the reliable one, the flexible one, the emotionally available one, your nervous system equates pulling back with danger. So when you say no, delay, or hold a line, guilt rushes in to pull you back into what's familiar. A steadier version of you doesn't try to eliminate guilt. It learns how to stand still while guilt passes through. This works because guilt is a sensation, not a verdict. It's a bodily response shaped by history, expectations, and conditioning. If you were rewarded for being helpful, agreeable, or self-sacrificing, your body learned that approval equals safety. When you stop chasing that approval, your system protests. It sends guilt as a warning signal, the same way it might send fear or anxiety. But just like fear doesn't always mean danger, guilt doesn't always mean wrongdoing. Often, it simply means you're doing something new. A lot of people misunderstand this and assume that feeling guilty means they should fix something. They reopen the conversation. They soften the boundary. They send another message to make sure everything's okay. In the moment, that relieves the discomfort. But the relief is temporary. What you're really doing is teaching your nervous system that guilt is an emergency. And once guilt becomes an emergency, it runs your life. The microscript for this section is an internal one. You don't say it to anyone else. You say to yourself, I can feel guilty and still keep my boundaries. That sentence matters because it separates emotion from action. You're not denying the feeling. You're refusing to let it dictate behavior. Let's put this into a real context. Imagine you've told a friend you can't help with something this week. They responded politely, maybe even said they understood. And yet, an hour later, guilt creeps in. You replay the exchange. You imagine them feeling let down. You start thinking about sending a follow-up message offering something smaller, just to ease the feeling. The old pattern would have you act on that impulse immediately. The new response is quieter. You notice the guilt. You name it. And you do nothing. You remind yourself, I can feel guilty and still keep my boundary. You let the sensation rise and fall without fixing it. 10 minutes later, the intensity drops. An hour later, it's mostly gone. You didn't harm the relationship. You just didn't feed the guilt. This also shows up at work in subtler ways. You decline a task or push a deadline, and even if your decision was reasonable, guilt lingers. You feel like you should prove your value by doing extra. You might overcompensate later, taking on more than you should. That's guilt sneaking in through the back door. When you recognize it, you can stop the cycle. You remind yourself that your worth is not measured by constant availability. You did not do anything wrong by pacing yourself. The reason guilt feels so convincing is that it often masquerades as morality. It sounds like responsibility, kindness, or professionalism. But there's a difference between acting from values and acting from discomfort. Values feel steady, even when they're hard. Guilt feels urgent and pressurized. It pushes you to act quickly to relieve the feeling. Learning to tell those two apart is a major step toward emotional autonomy. The tiny action for today is very specific and very challenging. The next time you feel guilty after setting a boundary, don't fix it for at least 30 minutes. Set a timer if you need to. During that time, you are not allowed to send follow-up messages, add explanations, or change your decision. Your only job is to notice the feeling and repeat the internal line once or twice. I can feel guilty and still keep my boundary. At the end of the 30 minutes, reassess. Most of the time, the urge to fix will have weakened enough that you can choose calmly instead of reactively. Now let's slow this into your body, because guilt lives there first. Bring to mind a recent situation where you felt guilty for saying no or delaying. Notice where the sensation shows up. Maybe it's a tight chest, a sinking feeling in your stomach, or a restless energy in your arms. Take a slow breath in, hold it, and let it out. As you exhale, say quietly, this feeling is allowed. Take another breath in, hold, and out. This time, say, this feeling does not decide. Let your shoulders soften as you breathe. You're practicing coexistence, not suppression. Something important happens when you stop obeying guilt automatically. Your boundaries start to feel less dramatic. They become normal. Ordinary. You stop treating them like moral tests and start treating them like information. Over time, your nervous system learns that nothing bad happens when you don't rush to fix discomfort. That learning is what creates lasting change. It's also worth noticing how guilt interacts with other people's reactions. Sometimes guilt shows up even when the other person isn't upset. Other times, it shows up because someone actually is disappointed. In both cases, the skill is the same. You can care about how someone feels without taking responsibility for fixing it. Disappointment is a normal human experience. It doesn't mean you failed. When you try to eliminate all disappointment, you end up eliminating yourself. This section builds directly on the earlier ones. You learn to check capacity. You learn to slow responses. You learn to hold boundaries under pressure and add warmth without overextending. Now you're learning to handle the internal backlash that comes after. Because the hardest part of boundaries is often not what others do, but what happens inside you afterward. As we move forward, keep this in mind: guilt is often the echo of an old role, not a signal of present danger. When you stop letting it steer, you gain a level of calm that doesn't depend on everyone else being okay. In the next section, we'll talk about how to decide what actually deserves your energy in the first place, so you're not constantly negotiating boundaries with everything and everyone. Section 7. Not everything that asks for your attention deserves your energy. Section 7 is about discernment, learning how to choose where your emotional bandwidth actually goes instead of negotiating boundaries with everything that shows up. The stake here is quiet but serious. If you treat every request, problem, and relationship as equally deserving of your energy, you'll stay in a constant state of low-grade depletion, even if you've learned how to say no occasionally. Here's the shift you're making now. Boundaries aren't just defensive. They're selective. A grounded version of you doesn't spend most of the day deciding what to block. It decides in advance what matters most and lets everything else take a secondary position. When you don't do this, you end up making boundary decisions reactively, one request at a time, which is exhausting. Discernment turns boundaries from constant firefighting into quiet alignment. This works because energy is shaped by meaning. Your nervous system responds differently when you're doing something that aligns with your values versus something that merely fills space or avoids discomfort. Two activities can take the same amount of time and leave you feeling completely different afterward. One leaves you steady, maybe even energized. The other leaves you heavy and irritable. The difference isn't effort. It's whether the activity deserves access to your deeper attention. A calmer, more focused version of you doesn't ask, "Can I handle this?" It asks, "Is this worthy of my best energy?" Many people skip this step because it feels abstract. It's easier to respond to what's loud than to decide what's important. So you answer messages because they're there. You attend meetings because you're invited. You engage in conversations because they start. Over time, your life becomes shaped by what interrupts you instead of what matters to you. Discernment reverses that pattern. The microscript for this section is short and internal. This doesn't get my best energy. You're not judging the thing or the person. You're making a private allocation decision. Best energy is reserved for what aligns with your priorities, your responsibilities, and your values. Everything else may still get something: time, courtesy, a response, but not your full emotional investment. Let's ground this in a real situation. Imagine it's the end of a workday. You've completed what actually matters for your role. Then a thread lights up with side discussions, opinions, and minor issues that don't require your input. The old pattern pulls you in. You read, react, and mentally engage, even though nothing productive comes from it. You log off feeling oddly drained. The new response is quieter. You scan, recognize that this doesn't require your best energy, and disengage. You don't mute forever. You don't announce anything. You simply choose not to invest emotionally. Your energy stays intact. This shows up just as strongly in personal life. Think of a recurring dynamic where someone brings the same problem to you over and over without taking action. You care about them, but each conversation leaves you feeling tired and helpless. Discernment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you recognize that repeated venting without change doesn't deserve unlimited emotional bandwidth. You might listen briefly. You might offer one grounded response. But you don't sink into the same emotional loop again. Internally, you remind yourself, "This doesn't get my best energy." The challenge here is that discernment can feel like judgment at first. You might worry you're becoming uncaring or detached. But discernment is not about closing your heart. It's about protecting what allows your heart to stay open. When you give everything equal weight, nothing gets your best. When you choose intentionally, the things that matter most benefit from your clarity and presence. The tiny action for today is practical and measurable. Make a short mental list of 3 areas that deserve your best energy right now. Not forever. Just this season. It might be your health, one key relationship, and one core responsibility at work. For the next 24 hours, when something competes with those 3, quietly downgrade it. You still respond if needed, but with less emotional investment. Notice how that changes how you feel at the end of the day. Now let's slow this into your body, because discernment often shows up as relief. Bring to mind something you've been giving too much energy to. Feel the familiar heaviness that comes with it. Take a slow breath in, hold it, and let it out. As you exhale, say quietly, "I choose where my energy goes." Say it again, slower. Notice if there's a softening in your chest or shoulders. That's your nervous system responding to clarity. Another important part of discernment is accepting trade-offs. Choosing what deserves your energy means accepting that some things will get less. That can feel uncomfortable if you're used to being broadly available or evenly invested. But trade-offs exist whether you choose them or not. If you don't choose deliberately, they're made for you by whoever is loudest or most persistent. Discernment puts you back in the driver's seat. This also reduces decision fatigue. When you know what matters most, many decisions become obvious. You don't have to analyze every request from scratch. You measure it against your priorities and move on. That simplicity conserves energy in itself. You stop living in constant evaluation mode. There's also a relational benefit here. When you constantly invest your best energy in what truly matters, people experience you as more present and more grounded. Even if they get less access overall, the access they do get is higher quality. That builds trust instead of resentment. You're no longer half present everywhere. You're fully present where it counts. This section builds on everything so far. You learn to separate time from capacity. You learn to slow responses. You learn to hold boundaries under pressure, add warmth without overextending, and let guilt pass without steering you. Discernment is what ties all of that together. It answers the question, if I'm protecting my energy, what am I protecting it for? As we move forward, hold on to this idea: boundaries are easier when your yes has meaning. In the next section, we'll look at how to return to connection intentionally after space, so pauses don't turn into distance or avoidance, and your boundaries actually support closeness instead of eroding it. Section 8. Taking space only works if you know how to come back. That's the skill you're building here, because a lot of people can pause, delay, or hold a boundary, but then they don't know how to re-enter connection without collapsing, avoiding, or overcompensating. The stake is real. If you don't learn how to return cleanly, your boundaries will either turn into distance you didn't intend, or they'll get erased by a flood of extra effort that drains you even more than the original situation. Here's the shift. Space is not the goal. Space is a tool. And the tool only does its job when it's paired with a deliberate return. When you take space and never return, people start guessing. You start guessing too. When you return in a rush, you often return with anxiety, guilt, and a need to fix the emotional temperature in the room. That's not a connection. That's emotional cleanup. A calmer, more focused version of you doesn't disappear and doesn't overcompensate. That version takes space on purpose, and then comes back on purpose. This works because the nervous system is pattern-based. When you pull back and then return predictably, you teach your body and the other person's body that the boundary is not rejection. It's pacing. Predictable pacing reduces tension. It reduces the mental checking that drains you. Are they mad? Did I mess up? Should I say something? It also prevents your relationships from becoming all or nothing, where you're either fully available or completely gone. When you return intentionally, you create a rhythm: engage, pause, re-engage. That rhythm is what makes closeness sustainable instead of exhausting. The hardest part is that returning can trigger its own discomfort. After you've held a boundary, you might feel awkward. You might feel guilty. You might worry you'll reopen conflict. Or you might fear that the other person will punish you with coldness. Those fears can push you into two unhelpful strategies. One is avoidance, where you stay quiet longer than you intended, hoping time will smooth it over. The other is overcorrection, where you come back with extra warmth, extra availability, or long explanations to prove you still care. Both strategies cost energy. Avoidance keeps your mind on edge. Overcorrection empties your tank. So you're going to practice a clean return. The microscript is short, warm, and steady. I wanted to follow up now that I have the energy. That sentence does three things at once. It signals care. It signals intention. And it anchors the return in capacity, not guilt. You're not apologizing for pacing yourself. You're not reopening debate. You're simply letting the other person know you're present now, in a way you can actually sustain. Now picture a concrete North American scene. It's Friday evening. Earlier in the week, a friend texted you wanting to talk about something heavy. You cared, but you were depleted and you didn't have capacity to hold it well, so you delayed instead of getting pulled into a long, draining exchange. The old you would either keep avoiding the thread because it feels awkward, or jump back in with a long message to make up for the delay. The steadier you return cleanly. You send one text, I wanted to follow up now that I have the energy. If you still want to talk, I'm here for a bit. They reply, yeah, thanks, and you have a shorter, calmer conversation that doesn't leave you numb afterward. You don't stay up late trying to prove you're supportive. You don't overextend. You show up, you listen, you respond, and you end the call on time. That's a boundary that supports connection instead of replacing it. Here's another example, because this comes up at work too. You told a coworker you couldn't review something the same day because you didn't have the energy to do it well. The next morning, you do have capacity. The old pattern is either to ignore it because you don't want to re-engage, or to dive in urgently and apologize repeatedly. The steadier pattern is simple. You open the file, review it with a clear mind, and message, I wanted to follow up now that I have the energy. I reviewed it this morning and left comments. Notice how that protects your professional credibility and your nervous system at the same time. You're reliable, but not reactive. You're present, but not porous. This matters because a lot of emotional exhaustion comes from unresolved loops. An unresolved loop is anything that stays open in your mind after you've set a boundary. The loop might be a text thread you delayed, a conversation you paused, a request you said no to. Even if you handled it well, your mind can keep scanning it for danger. Closing the loop intentionally reduces that scanning. It returns your attention to your own life. It also reduces the temptation to check by sending unnecessary messages. Checking is often disguised as kindness, but it's usually anxiety. Intentional return lets you be kind without feeding anxiety. There's a subtle but powerful difference between returning and renegotiating. Returning is, I'm here now and I have capacity. Renegotiating is, please don't be upset, here's more access to me. When you return, you keep the boundary intact. When you renegotiate, you teach people that pressure works. You teach yourself that holding a line creates guilt you must pay off with extra effort. That is how boundaries collapse over time. So the tiny action for today is specific and measurable. Choose one place where you've taken space in the last week, one delayed reply, one paused conversation, one boundary you set that still feels a little unfinished. If you genuinely have capacity now, close the loop with one message using the microscript. Keep it to 2 sentences. I wanted to follow up now that I have the energy. If you still want to talk about it, I'm available for a bit today. If you don't have capacity, you can still close the loop with honesty. I wanted to follow up. I don't have the energy today, but I can check on Sunday afternoon. The point is that you return intentionally, not randomly, and not out of panic. Now let's slow this down into your body, because returning cleanly is not just a communication skill. It's a regulation skill. Bring to mind someone you paused with. Notice any tension that comes up about reconnecting. Maybe it's a tight throat, a restless stomach, or a slightly racing mind. Right now, take one slow breath in, hold it for a beat, and let it out. As you exhale, say quietly to yourself, I can return without undoing my boundary. Take another slow breath in, hold, and out. Say it again, a little slower, and feel what it does to your shoulders. You're teaching your nervous system that reconnection doesn't require self-abandonment. Also watch for the urge to overcorrect. Overcorrecting is when you try to compensate for space by giving more than you can sustain. It might look like sending a long text, staying on a call too long, replying instantly for the next few hours to prove you're not distant, or offering extra favors so the other person feels secure. That feels like warmth, but it's actually fear. And fear-based warmth drains you. Instead, you're going to practice grounded warmth, short, clear, present, and then done. When you can return with grounded warmth, you don't fear taking space. And when you don't fear taking space, you stop leaking energy from constant availability. This is how boundaries start feeling supportive instead of isolating. The goal isn't to create distance. The goal is to create a pace that allows closeness without burnout. You're not training yourself to be harder. You're training yourself to be steadier. And steadiness is what makes relationships safer, because people know what to expect. You may pause, but you don't vanish. You may say no, but you're still caring. You may delay, but you come back with intention. Hold on to this, because it's going to matter in the final story. When pressure hits and emotions run high, the difference between a boundary that creates cold distance and a boundary that creates sustainable connection is this exact skill: taking space, then returning cleanly, without guilt, without flooding, and without losing yourself. Section 9. It's Friday evening, and the week has already taken more out of you than you expected. You're on your way home, traffic slow, mind tired but quieter than it used to be. You're looking forward to a simple night, maybe takeout, maybe nothing at all. Then your phone buzzes. It's a message you recognize instantly as dangerous for your energy. Someone you care about. Someone whose requests often start small and end up heavy. The text reads, "Hey, are you free tonight? I really need to talk." Nothing dramatic on the surface. But your body reacts before your mind does. There's that familiar tightening in your chest. The old reflex whispers, just answer, just help, it'll be easier than dealing with the fallout. A few weeks ago, you would have responded immediately. You would have said yes because you technically had time. You would have gotten pulled into a long conversation, absorbed someone else's emotions, stayed up too late, and spent the weekend feeling oddly resentful and depleted. That was the pattern. Availability turned into obligation. Obligation turned into exhaustion. This time, something is different. You don't reply right away. You remember that speed doesn't care. You let the message sit as you pull into your driveway. You take one slow breath before even unlocking the door. In, hold, out. You notice the signal clearly now. You don't have the energy to hold something heavy tonight. Not without paying for it all weekend. Inside, guilt flickers. A familiar thought tries to take over. If you don't respond now, you're being selfish. You recognize it for what it is, an old reflex, not a command. You let it be there without obeying it. Another slow breath. You remind yourself that you can feel guilty and still keep your boundaries. After a few minutes, you send a short reply. Calm. Clean. I've seen this. I don't have the energy to talk tonight, but I can check in tomorrow afternoon. No apology. No long explanation. You put the phone down. For a moment, the silence feels loud. Your mind wants to check. To add something warmer. To make sure they're okay. You catch that urge before it turns into action. You remember that warmth doesn't require collapse. You already showed care by being clear. You don't need to manage their reaction too. An hour passes. The reply comes back. Okay. I get it. That's it. No drama. No guilt trip. Even if there had been disappointment, you know now that disappointment is not an emergency. You eat dinner. You watch something light. Your shoulders slowly drop. For the first time in a while, Friday night actually feels like it belongs to you. The next day, Saturday afternoon, you notice something else. You do have more capacity. You slept well. Your mind feels steadier. You remember that return matters as much as space. Instead of waiting for them to reach out again or avoiding the thread entirely, you decide to return intentionally. You send one message. I wanted to follow up now that I have the energy. If you still want to talk, I'm around for a bit. You don't overthink it. You don't brace yourself. You trust the process. They reply quickly this time. You talk. The conversation is shorter than it would have been on Friday, but it's clearer. You listen without feeling trapped. You respond without rushing to fix everything. When you feel your energy starting to dip, you notice it early. You don't push past it. You say, I'm glad we talked. I need to step away now. And you do. After the call, there's no emotional hangover. No replaying the conversation. No resentment. You feel calm. Available in the way that actually counts. Later that evening, another test shows up. A work-related email lands, asking for something by Monday morning. You would have opened the laptop immediately, sacrificing the rest of the weekend to get ahead. This time, you pause. You ask the question that now comes naturally, does this deserve my best energy right now? The answer is no. You decide it can wait until Sunday evening. You send a short response acknowledging the message and stating when you'll follow up. Then you close the laptop. The boundary holds. Your weekend stays intact. What's different isn't that fewer things asked for your attention. It's that you stopped giving everything equal weight. You separated time from capacity. You slowed your responses. You held your boundary when pressure showed up. You let guilt pass without steering. You chose what deserved your energy. And you returned to connection intentionally instead of anxiously. None of this felt dramatic. There was no confrontation. No big speech. Just a series of small, deliberate choices that added up to something noticeable. You ended the weekend feeling rested instead of resentful. As you get ready for the week ahead, you realize something quietly important. Boundaries didn't make you colder. They made you clearer. And clarity didn't push people away. It made your presence more real when you chose to give it. That's the difference. Not reacting. Responding. Not disappearing. Pacing. Not living on empty by Thursday and recovering all weekend. Just moving through your days with enough energy left to actually enjoy your life. Section 10. This episode was really about one thing, managing your energy like it's a real, limited resource instead of pretending that an open schedule means you should be endlessly available. Reacting makes you quick, compliant, and quietly depleted. Responding makes you deliberate, steady, and able to stay connected without feeling emptied out by midweek. First, we stepped into that everyday moment where a small request hits your screen and your body tightens even though you technically have time, and we named the real problem. You can be free on paper and still be emotionally overdrawn. Next, you learn to separate availability from capacity, so you stop saying yes just because there's space in the day and start asking whether you can actually carry it without paying for it later. Then we slowed your response speed, because urgency is contagious, and answering everything immediately trains your nervous system and everyone around you to treat you like you're always on call. After that, we dealt with the part that breaks most boundaries, pushback, where someone tries to close the space you created, and you practice holding your line with calm repetition instead of turning it into a debate. Then we added warmth without overextension, so your limits don't come out as coldness or withdrawal, and you can be kind without doing extra emotional labor that drains you. After that, we confronted guilt directly, not as proof you did something wrong, but as a predictable feeling that shows up when you break an old pattern, and you practiced letting it exist without letting it steer. Next, we sharpen discernment so you stop treating everything as equally deserving of your best energy, because the fastest way to stay exhausted is to give equal weight to what matters and what merely interrupts. Then you learned how to return to connection intentionally after space, because boundaries work best when they're paired with clean reentry, not avoidance and not overcorrection. Finally, we walked through that Friday night situation where all of this got stress tested in real time. You paused before replying, checked capacity, held the line, let guilt pass, and came back the next day with intention, protecting your weekend and preserving the relationship at the same time. The point isn't to become harder. It's to become clearer. Clear people don't need to fight for their peace because they stop giving it away in tiny, automatic ways. And when you're clear, you don't have to rely on willpower all week. You rely on a few simple decisions made early, before you're already tired, irritated, or halfway into a commitment you didn't choose. Today, pick one request you're about to answer and run the capacity check before you respond. Do I have the energy to do this well without resenting it later? If not, delay it or decline it with a calm, short line instead of forcing a yes. Today, choose one message that spikes urgency and doesn't fully respond immediately, acknowledge it and buy yourself time so you decide from steadiness, not pressure. Today, close one open loop you've been avoiding. If you have capacity now, send one intentional follow-up that signals you're returning on purpose, not flooding back in to fix discomfort. If this resonated, the next lesson you'll want is about staying steady when someone else is emotional, especially how to handle guilt trips, anger, or anxiety without getting pulled into instant reassurance or instant conflict, something like how to stay calm when someone wants a reaction. If you want a whole library of Stoic Focus lessons on emotional control, boundaries, and relationships, this is what we build here week after week. If you feel messages like this need to reach more people, hit like, tap subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.